So let's get started. Okay, so as I was telling your friends, I've been investing for almost 20 years now, since around the time when I was in university, and since the time when I was allowed to do it legally. And I've become convinced that investing is one of the better ways to break out of what I have called the second poverty cycle. So today's presentation is going to be divided into a few parts. First, I'm going to introduce banks and the services they provide, because this is something that will touch everyone's lives. Everyone is going to need a bank and their services at some point in your lives. Then we're going to go into how to create a budget, how to do some budgeting, because that is an essential first step to not getting into any debt. And it's a simple thing to do. And once you have your budget settled and you have some savings, then you can get started investing. And investing is going to be something that's going to help you boost your savings. So let's talk about what I call the second poverty cycle. People always talk about breaking out of the cycle of poverty, and that the best way to do that is through education. But if you look around you, you'll see that there are a lot of people who actually have a good education, and they still find themselves fumbling around when it comes to managing their money. And even worse, sometimes ending up in a great amount of debt. So I believe it comes down to what I call the second cycle of poverty. So the first cycle happens when you don't have the required knowledge to do well in a modern world. You can't read, you can't write, you can't add numbers. It's going to be extremely difficult to break out of subsistence farming or something like that, or a minimum wage job, and earn a better life for yourself and your family, right? If you're illiterate, there's not much you can do in today's modern world. But all of you already have a great education. A lot of people out there have graduated from university, and they still find themselves in debt. And that's what I call the second cycle of poverty, which is what happens after an educated person enters the workforce and has to take on financial responsibilities that they have never been trained for. You know, schools teach you math, physics, chemistry, other skills, but a lot of them don't teach you financial planning. And that is going to be very important as you grow older. So how do people end up with so much debt? Very simply, first, they take on too much debt. Or they take on debt, but at too high an interest rate. Another thing is, some people don't understand how inflation can make you poorer. Inflation is making us poorer every day. So what can we do about it? One of the things you can do, and I'm going to say this a lot, is investing. So those people who don't take advantage of that, they're going to see their savings slowly get eroded away in value. So as I mentioned to some of your friends, although I am going to mention the word investing a lot, I'm not here to teach you what to invest in, how to invest in. There are other courses for that. Today, we're just going to talk about why it's very important that you should invest in something. Okay, so let's talk about banks first. In its simplest form, what's a bank? It's a place where you can safely deposit your money. This is a much better alternative than what my grandmother did, which was to keep it under her bed. So the next question you ask is, why should I trust my money with a bank? What if the bank fails? Businesses go out of business, go bankrupt all the time. A bank is just a business like any other thing. Well, in Singapore, we have some safety nets in place. In addition to having more security than your average flat, there is something called the Singapore Deposit Insurance Corporation. It administers the deposit insurance scheme, of which all banks in Singapore have to be members of. So even if the bank you're putting your money in goes completely bankrupt, you are still covered for the first $75,000 of the money that you deposit with them. So banks keep your money for you. They even buy insurance to cover the money that you leave with them. What do they get out of it? You know, it can't be cheap to maintain all those ATMs and fancy officers and all those people who are happy to take the money that you deposit. So what happens is, when you deposit your money with the bank, you lend the bank your money, and the bank pays you an interest. So if you have looked at your banking statement before, you'll see that every month you earn a little bit of interest on the money you have in the bank. So what the bank has done is that they take your money, they pay you an interest on it, and they lend your money out to other businesses at a higher interest rate than what they're paying you. So they may pay you 0.5%, but they are lending it out at 6%. So they earn the difference. So this is one of the many things that banks do. But as far as most of us are concerned, this is what we need to know at this point in your lives when it comes to banks. So now that you have a banking account, a savings account, what can you do with it aside from it's just a place to keep your money? Well, the first thing is you're going to have an ATM card. So you can use that to withdraw cash when you need to use it. I think everyone here has an ATM card already. Yeah, so you're familiar with that. I'll go a bit faster on that part. So when you're older, you'll be able to use other services like debit cards, credit cards. You've probably seen your parents using those, right? Yeah. And once you're even older, you're going to have a checking account. And this is probably something you may not have touched on yet. Has anyone written a check before? Maybe for your parents or for anything you need to buy? Not yet? No? Okay. So let's talk a bit about checks. Sorry. So a checking account is issued by your bank, and it usually looks something like what I have here on the screen. Can everyone see that? Yeah? Okay. So when you fill in a check, it's an instruction, it's a written instruction to your bank to make a payment to another person or organization. And the fields you have to fill in are like what's shown here. You have to fill in the date you're writing the check, the name of who you are paying to, the amount that you want to pay, the amount written out in words. So you may be wondering, why was I writing out numbers in words in primary school? And this is the reason why. You have to sign it to show that, yes, I am authorizing payment from my bank account to this person whose name is written here. So after you have filled out your check, you give it to whoever you're making the payment to. He will then flip the check to the back, and he has to fill in 3 things: his bank account number, his name, his phone number. And he's going to take the check to his own bank. He's going to deposit it in a check deposit box. They're going to collect the check, and they're going to start processing it. In Singapore, we're very fast about this. Usually it takes not more than 2 days to process a check, at which time, in this case, Cherry Tay will see the money in her bank account, and you sadly will see the money go out of your bank account. An interesting thing about checks is that you don't always have to write it out to a specific person. You can write the check out to cash. So instead of writing a name, you just put cash, and you go to the bank and you withdraw that amount of money. But be very careful, because once you write the word cash on it and you sign it, that check is as good as money. If you drop it and someone picks it up, they can just go straight to the bank and withdraw the full amount of money. Okay, so checks is one thing that banks can do. Credit cards is another thing. So when I was a kid, I followed my mother around on her shopping trips. I was always amazed. I said, wow, she doesn't need money to buy stuff, right? She's got this magical card. She just whips it off her purse and she buys everything. Anyone knows how credit cards and banks work? You're familiar? No? Okay. So credit cards are a great invention. What you do is that you use it to make your purchases at various shops, and you don't pay the money straight away. In fact, what happens is, on a monthly basis, the bank will then sum up all the payments you have made and collect one lump sum from you. And then they will pay the merchants then. So you are buying things on credit with the bank. The bank is, in a way, lending you the money first. And that's how the name comes about. So each person's credit card will always come with a limit on how much you can spend, or how much credit the bank is willing to extend to you. The limit, surprisingly, is usually a multiple of your monthly salary. And therein lies one of the things that gets people into the second poverty cycle. They start buying things which they can't afford. So if you're earning I remember my first credit card, I was earning $3,000 a month, and I think my credit limit was $10,000. So you can see a problem right there. I can go and blow $10,000 on something and have no way to pay it back next month when I get $3,000. So a lot of people use credit cards to buy things which they are not able to afford. Why does the bank allow this? Because every month when the bank comes to collect, they'll say, either pay off your full bill of $10,000, or you can just pay a small amount, $50, $100, and we'll roll over the remainder to your next month's bill. But the downside is they're going to charge you an interest on the amount you owe them. Anybody has an idea of how much interest banks charge on credit cards on the outstanding amounts? Anybody has an idea? Okay, the number looks very small. They charge you 2% of whatever you owe them per month. Okay, sounds small, but if you deposit your money in a bank account, the interest you earn is only 1% a year. So credit card companies are charging you 2% a month, but if you put your money in a deposit account, you're only earning 1% a year. So that's a big difference. So credit card debt is one of the reasons why people quickly find themselves in hot soup with more debt than they can service. So in short, my advice is not to have any credit card debt, but that doesn't mean not to use any credit cards. They have a lot of convenience. I use them all the time. I have multiple credit cards, but no credit card debt. I use them so I don't have to carry around so much money all the time. In my opinion, they're also safer than cash. If you drop your cash, someone picks it up, it's gone. If you drop your credit card, you immediately call your banker, tell them, I lost my card, please cancel it. Your money will probably still be safe. And there are certain perks that you can have. You may have seen these ads on buses, in the MRTs, that tell you have cash back, or you can earn points, you can earn miles, or using your credit cards. You don't get any of that by using cash. So there are some perks, but just don't get into any debt. So debit cards. Debit cards work just like credit cards, but the bank doesn't extend you any line of credit. You can only spend as much money as you have in your connected bank account. So some people like to use debit cards, because they say, well, I won't get myself into any debt because I can only spend what I have. So this forces them to be more disciplined in their spending. Let's see, I'm going to skip over ATM cards because this was originally written for a younger audience, but I'm sure all of you are already familiar with this. Okay, so that's basic financial services that the banks provide that you all need. Let's go on to the topic of budgeting. This is important because it's the first step to not getting into the second poverty cycle. If you're not in debt, you won't be caught in any poverty. And once you have your finances better managed and you can start saving, then you're going to have money to invest in, which is what we're going to talk about towards the end of this presentation. Okay, so I said, budgeting is going to be the first thing you can do to make sure you don't end up in debt. If you're not spending more than what you have, you're never going to be in debt. If you spend less than what you make each month, you start to have savings. Now, there are some cases, I'm going to talk a bit about this, where you have to take out a loan, you have to borrow. As you all may have seen in the news, housing prices in Singapore keep going up. Most people are not going to be able to afford their first home at the time when they want to have their first home. So they take out a loan from the bank called a mortgage. So let's talk a bit about how budgeting is done. There's a few easy steps that you can follow. The first step, what do you need to do before you can spend money? You have to make money, or at least you got to have some money coming in. For you guys, it's most likely going to be from the allowance given by your parents. So the very first thing you want to do is to take note of how much money you have coming in every month and whether this is constant or not. So don't take the baseline as the month when you have your birthday and your relatives are giving you money. Yeah. So the first thing you want to do is you note your income, how much money you have every month. So take the allowance that your parents are giving you. Don't take one-time bonuses, like time when your brother paid you back the $50 he owes you, or your parents give you $100 for doing well at exams or things like that. take the constant amount that you're getting every month. Next, you want to see how much you're spending every month. How much do you spend taking the bus and the MRT to school every day? How much do you spend on food? Other things could be like how much you spend on your hobbies. Basically, take anything that involves you taking money from your pocket and putting it in another person's pocket. Take your income minus all your expenses, and what you have left is your net income. The next thing, now that you have recorded all your expenses, keep track and categorize them. The reason for doing this is to understand where you are spending most of your money. The easiest way to do this, to categorize them, is to split your expenses into fixed expenses. Those would be things like transportation, food, your mobile phone bill, and separate it into variable expenses. Stuff that would fall under variable expenses include things like buying a birthday present for your father, present for Mother's Day, a new badminton racket when your old one breaks. Basically, things that don't happen regularly. It's usually under the variable expenses where you are able to quickly find some things to cut down on if you have to. So why are we doing budgeting? The whole point of budgeting is to save enough money so that we can work towards our goals, the things that we really want. Short-term goals could be something fun, like buying that new PS5, if you can find one, or that new graphics card for your PC, or that new table tennis bat. Longer-term goals would be like saving up enough so that you can afford to go overseas for university, or to start investing, or to put down a deposit for your own home once you're older. The important thing is to set your goals so that you can keep sight of what you are working towards while you're doing all this hard work. However, don't forget that goals can change over time as we change, and you should update your goals accordingly. When I was a younger person, all I did to do was to buy a nice flashy car. Now that I'm older and with kids, because I'm thinking of the cars have gone out of the picture, and now we're looking at homes for our children instead. So keep track of your goals as they change. Now, if you find that after you've done your budgeting, you've looked at your income and your expenses, you find that you're spending more than you have every month, you need to start making a plan to cut down on your expenses. So this is something much easier and more immediate that you can do to stop yourself from getting into debt. You can get into debt by cutting your expenses almost right away. But if you want to get out of debt by earning more money, it's going to take more time and effort. So when you go over your list, you'll see that you can't change your fixed expenses much. You still need to go to school every day. You need to eat every day, unless you want to wake up a whole lot earlier and walk to school every day. So it's easier to find savings under the variable expenses, which is why I told you guys to split it up into fixed and variable earlier on. You don't have to get the bestest, nicest present for your best friend for his birthday. You don't have to buy the most expensive flowers for Mother's Day. So there you can make some savings. Unless you're a professional ball player, you probably don't need to restring your tennis racket every month. Instead of going to the movies with your friends, which could easily cost you $15, you can rent a movie and watch it on your Apple devices. So the important thing here is to separate the things that you really need to do from the things that you really want to do. So after you've taken a look at your variable expenses and made cuts to wherever you could, and you're still over budget, the next thing you want to look at are your fixed expenses. Now, don't forget I mentioned that these are going to be much harder to change because fixed expenses are things that happen every day and they impact your life every day. So like if I have an electricity bill of $80 a month and I'm trying to cut that down to 60, it's going to be very difficult because I still need to use my computer for work every day. I still need to turn on the lights every day. I need to turn on the air conditioning. So if you want to do that, it's going to be more uncomfortable maybe because you're going to be sleeping in hot, humid weather every night. So yeah, fixed expenses usually impact us every day and it's going to be harder to change, but you can make changes. So I want to summarize this section by saying that it's a good practice to review your budget on a regular basis, as it will help keep you informed of whether you're on track to your goals. You review your budget to make adjustments. Sometimes you have an increase in your allowance, or are you doing some part-time work that earns you more money, or have you started to help with the household expenses? So keep track of whether your expenses are going up or down, whether your allowance is going up or down. Okay, and of course, once you have reached your goals, you've got that PS5 that you always wanted, it's time to sit down and make some new goals to work towards. So I talked a bit about responsible borrowing. So like I said, we try not to get into debt. We try not to borrow money that we don't have, but there will be times when you have to borrow. Most usually when we talk about buying a house. Most people have a mortgage. I have a mortgage, and nobody ever frowns on anyone doing that. But the important thing is, don't buy something where it's going to be a lot more than what you can afford. You don't always have to take out the maximum mortgage. You want to make sure that you can still make the monthly payments to your bank for your mortgage. You want to make sure that whatever loan you take out, you can afford to make the monthly repayments, because penalties for non-repayment are always going to be very high, and that's what gets you into trouble. Okay, so it's okay to borrow. Just ensure that you're not borrowing more than you can afford to repay every month. Okay, so for example, my mortgage is about 2% a year. And between my wife and I, we are able to manage the monthly payments and still have some savings. So we're comfortable with that. If for whatever reason you do get into credit card debt, let's say you've used up all your savings and there's a medical emergency and the only source of money you have is your credit card, okay, if it's an emergency, it's an emergency, but I would prioritize paying back credit card debt first, because like we said, a very high interest rate, which gets people into trouble, and is due to the effect of compounding. So the next part I'm going to talk about is compounding, which is what you will hear a lot of when it comes to savings and investments. So Einstein, famous physics guy, really smart guy, much smarter than me, he himself acknowledged the power of compounding. So he called it the eighth wonder of the world. The person who understands compounding is going to earn it, and the person who doesn't understand it is going to pay it. So let's say you start out with $100, and there is a magical investment box that you can put your $100 in, and it's going to earn you 10% interest every year forever. So we're going to compare two things. In one case, the person is just going to save $100 every year, and it earns no interest. In the other case, the person is going to put in $100 at the start, and he's going to earn 10% interest every year forever, but he doesn't put in any more money. So if you can see from the chart, actually, by about year 40, you would have saved without interest $4,000. But if you had just put in $100 at the start, and the interest just kept on going for 10%, by about year 40, I think. Let's see. Yeah. But by about year 40, you will have about the same amount of money in both boxes. By year 50, the box, which earned 10% interest every year, is actually going to have double the amount of money compared to if you had put in $100 in the box every year instead. All right. Now, imagine how much more you would have if you had put $100 every year into that box, which earns 10% interest as well. So if you put all your savings to work by investing, by having something that earns you 10% interest, at the end of 50 years, you are going to have 10 times of what you would have from just earning interest alone. And you're going to have 20 times what you would have from just savings alone. Now, this is a pretty interesting chart, but let's not forget that compounding cuts both ways. It can accelerate your savings, but it's also the same reason why any unpaid credit card debt, which we talked about earlier, can quickly get out of hand. Imagine if every month you're accruing new debt, you're adding to your credit card debt, and the bank is charging you 28% a year. How quickly is what you owe the bank going to get out of hand before you can afford to pay it all off? So let's talk about savings. If I'm not wrong, I think Singapore and most Asian countries have a very high savings rate. So you must, we're going to talk about how savings can be eroded by inflation. You think you're saving more money, but actually you're losing a part of it every year as well. So let me talk a bit about how this works. So for those of you who don't know, inflation is basically just how the same thing starts to cost more as time goes by. Okay, so I'm talking a lot today about breaking out of cycles of poverty. I talk a lot about investing, how with compounding, how it's great and everything. But you don't want to put all your money into investments. You need savings. Savings is prudent. Everybody should have some savings in an emergency fund. You never know when you're going to need the money. If you're touch wood, if you're in an accident, like I was before, you need the money to pay your hospital bills. You can't have all your investments in real estate and stocks and bonds and everything. You need the money right now. So that's why everybody needs some savings. Okay. So, but I also want to remind everyone that savings is losing. Why do you lose money when you save? You're thinking, how can I lose money? It's in the bank, right? I'm putting in more money. But you also have to remember what interest rate the banks pay you for your savings is typically going to be lower than the rate of inflation. Inflation eats away at your purchasing power. So just a simple example, you want to buy $100 collectible toy. So you save $100 in your bank account and you say, well, I'll think about it for a year and see if by the end of the year, I really, really still want to buy this collectible. And the bank pays you 1% interest. So at the end of the year, you're going to have $101. But the inflation rate could be something like 6%. So that same $100 collectible at the end of the year, it's not going to be $100 anymore. Things get more expensive. The shop's rent goes up, workers' salary goes up, everything goes up. That same collectible is now going to sell for $106. So you have just lost out $5. Okay, so that's one way how savings is losing. Okay, so how do we close this gap? We have this $5 gap you close, and again, for me myself, I advocate investing. So let's see. Now, let's not just take my anecdotal evidence that things get more expensive. Here are a couple of articles from CNBC which show how things are getting more expensive all the time. So the first article says home prices rising faster than income. I'm going to present to you a real life example about this as well. In the next article, you'll see wholesale prices rose 8.6%. And you'll see constantly in the newspapers articles talking about how high inflation is, how it's impacting everybody, how things are getting more expensive with time. People think, oh yeah, it's getting more expensive, but I'll just keep making more money to cover all that. But you making more money doesn't change the fact that the savings you already have is actually losing money. So here's a couple of charts. The first one is about Singapore private residential properties. As you can see, it's going up. I think in the last 10 years, home prices in Singapore were up 30%, but generally your income only rose 11%. In America, I think it's even more stark. They said that if you look at the last 50 years, home prices went up over 100%. That means houses are now twice as expensive as what they used to cost. But over that same period of time, people's income only went up 15%. So you are very much worse off if you are just trying to save your way into buying a home. Just savings alone is probably not going to cut it unless you had a huge raise in your pay. You started out as a clerk and now you're the CEO and you're getting millions of dollars in stock options and salary and bonuses. So for the average person, they're going to be much worse off. These are all just numbers. I want to talk to you about a real life example. So my own parents' experience in buying a home. 40 years ago, which is around the time I was born, my parents bought their first home, an apartment that cost them $70,000. So that was almost all the money they had. I think they took out a small mortgage. They each had a monthly salary of about $1,000. Now, back in the day, 40 years ago, having a university degree was a rarity. Having a master's degree was even more unheard of. And both my parents had master's degrees, and their salaries were already on the high end of the spectrum. It was top for someone who is just starting out, and that was about $1,000 a month. Today, that same apartment, which we still own, is selling for about $1.5 million. And I just did some asking around. A high starting salary for a lawyer today, someone fresh out of law school, is about $8,000 or $10,000 if it goes really high. So salaries have gone up about 8 times, but the price of housing has gone up 21 times. So my parents' time, the price of an apartment was equivalent to 70 months starting salary. Now it's closer to 190 months starting salary. So it's not going to be easy to. So as you can see, inflation is making this gap wider and wider and wider. So we need to do more. We need to work. Well, I'm sure your teachers have always told you, work smart, don't work hard. Put your money to work for you. And this is what they mean. If you're just relying on your income, not that you can't make it, it's just going to be a lot more difficult. Okay, so this is a prime example of how inflation will eat away at your savings by things getting more expensive faster than your boss is willing to give you a raise. So let's bridge this gap through investments. So there are many ways to invest. There are 1,001 things to invest in. You can buy collectible cards. You can buy stamps. There are people who buy art. I still have some of my Magic the Gathering cards from when I was 13 years old. They're sitting dusty in a storeroom. Don't know what to do with them. But I heard they were getting more expensive. So that's something as well. So why should you invest? Once again, as I said, it's one of the ways to break out of the poverty cycle, because hopefully you're going to earn a return on your investments that's higher than the rate of inflation. So just as we said, because inflation is higher than the interest rates banks pay you, your gap is widening. If you can earn a return higher than the rate of inflation, then the gap is going to be closing. All right. Inflation is relentless. It doesn't matter whether you are a clerk or a CEO, whatever savings you have, even if you're putting in more money every month, it just means that the money you put in last year is going to be worth less the next year, even if it's more money. You're going to have more, you're going to be better off, but at a slower pace. Okay. So, but I want to stress to everyone, I keep talking about investments. I love it. A lot of people love it. People have made fortunes off investing, but it is never a sure thing. People lose money in investments as well. Just as I have known people who become billionaires of investing, there are people who have become paupers by investing as well. So the key thing, only invest the money you can afford to lose. Don't go and borrow off your credit card or borrow from your friends to make investments, because that will land you in trouble. Out of 10 times, probably 11 times you're going to get in trouble. So why am I so bullish about investing? Why do I like this so much? Because according to the world's best investors, they said major investment products will continue to grow over time. Right? This is because the world over time is going to improve. It will grow, it will be better, there'll be better companies doing better things that more people want to experience, they want to be a part of. And anyway, if the world is not improving, you're going to have bigger problems than worrying about the value of your investments. So myself, like I said earlier, there's 1,001 things you can invest in, but I like to invest in the shares of companies. Is everyone familiar with what I mean by the shares of a company? Yeah? Okay. So, but another reason why I like investing in shares is the potential for supernormal returns. So let's take a look at some. The 10-year return for these stocks, which I think most people would have heard of. If you had bought Apple 10 years ago, you would have a return of over 1,000%. That means if you put in $100 10 years ago, today that $100 would be $1,000. And all for you doing nothing than having faith that Apple is a good company. If you bought Amazon 10 years ago, you would have made over 2,000%, 20 times your money. If you bought Netflix, you would have made 39 times your money. If you had bought Tesla, you would have made 200 times your money. So these are some of the phenomenal returns that you can experience if you are lucky or smart enough to invest in these companies. But let's not forget the risks. It's not all good news. Not every company is going to be a Tesla. Not every company is going to be a Microsoft. I once heard somebody, I was standing in line at a McDonald's and one student was telling his friend, I have never lost any money in the stock market because any company that has gone down in price, I just don't sell it. So technically, I haven't lost any money. No, if the share price goes down, you have lost the money. You're never going to get it back. There are companies that go to all-time high prices. You unfortunately buy it at a high price and it comes down and you never get that money back. So I would say that over a long term, the entire market will go up, but the market is made up of winners and losers, and sometimes you're going to be stuck with some losers. I've experienced that, still experiencing that. So just this example, Zynga, the company that makes games for Facebook, if you had unfortunately bought it at its all-time high price, you are still losing money today. Okay. Oh no, what's happening here? Okay. So I hope I'm not confusing any of you. I'm telling you all, invest. It's the way to get out of the poverty cycle. But at the same time, I'm telling you, be careful. You're going to lose all your money if you buy the wrong stock. So probably some of you are a bit confused right now. What should I do? I'm new to this game. I don't want to be stuck holding the bag of a company that's losing money. So what you can do and what they recommend, even by the best investors in the world, like Warren Buffett, he recommends that for people who are not familiar with the markets, what they should do is invest in an index tracker. Now, has anyone heard this term before, an index tracking fund or index tracker? No? Okay. So an index fund, let's take one very famous index fund in America. It's called the Standard & Poor's 500. In short, they call it the S&P 500. Basically, what the S&P 500 does is there's a committee that meets every quarter, I think, and they decide which are the 500 best companies in America that we want to monitor. So every quarter they will look and they say, oh, this company has been doing very badly. We're going to kick it out of our index and we're going to put in this other company as well. So like one of the big ones last year was when they said, oh, Tesla has finally met our criteria. It's doing really well. It's worth a lot of money. We're going to put it in our index and we're going to kick out some others which are losing. So through this index, people monitor how the market is doing. And usually, and then there are other fund management companies. The other company that says, hey, this index looks great. They're already doing the work, choosing the 500 best companies for us. Let's buy those same 500 companies and we'll let people invest in us so that they can enjoy these same 500 companies as well. So an index tracker fund basically just tries to mimic what Standard & Poor's is doing with their S&P 500 index fund. So when they kick out a fund, the fund managers have to sell all the shares of the company as well. When they put in a new company, the fund managers have to buy shares in that company as well, so that the fund managers index tracker fund closely mimics the index itself. So a lot of people like this because they say it's easy. I don't have to worry. Someone else is doing the buying and selling for me. I'm getting the 500 best companies in America. But just because it's the 500 best companies, like I said, doesn't mean that they're going to be winners all the time. They regularly get kicked out and others added. But one good benefit is that for one low price and for not having to do any work, you get diversification. You suddenly have a portfolio that has got 500 companies in it. I think my own portfolio has maybe 12 companies in it. The one for the portfolio that I manage for myself and my family. So some people are saying, wow, index funds are great. I just buy into a fund management company, and I get 500 companies in my portfolio. And let's take a look about why so many people like to buy index funds. There's literally hundreds of billions of dollars around the world invested in index funds. Because let's look at the S&P 500 for the last 40 years. As you can see, it's not all smooth sailing. There have been periods where it dropped down. Famous 1998, 99 crash, it came down. In more recent memory, but which you all probably aren't aware of, was 2008. There was a big crisis as well, so it came down. So if you buy right at the high and you sell right at the low, of course you can lose some money. Nothing is a sure thing. You have heard about risk-reward basis. So the reward that you have, the risk, you have to take on some risk for getting a potential reward of higher returns on your investments. But over the long term, if you can hold this, if you have held your investment for 40 years or even 30 years, generally you're going to come out on top. You're going to do better than investing your money or putting your money in a safe deposit account. All right. So I think the return was something like, if you put in $80 in 1981, so that's the year I was born. If my parents had put in $80 for me, the Chinese love 80, right? Lucky number. Put in $80 when I was born in the S&P 500. Today, I would have $9,000 instead of just $80. Another reason why I like buying shares. Now, I can tell you about my experience with collectible cards. It's an investment that some people like. I bought something for, let's see, I think it was $300 back in 1996, 97. I've not looked at that card since. And recently, my friend told me that the same card is now worth about 6,000 US dollars. So great return on investment. But unfortunately, it seems there's a lot of counterfeits nowadays. So you take on even greater risk. In the share market, it's well regulated. No one is selling you counterfeit shares. You can't sell counterfeit shares in a company. So you don't have to worry about things like that. There's lots of information easily available. If you decide you want to invest in Tesla, in Netflix, in whatever company, all these companies which are selling their shares on the stock markets are required by law to put all their financial statements up on their website. You can easily look how well they're doing or how badly they are doing. There are even analysts who come out and write about these companies. They talk about their financials. They talk about whether they think the share price is going to go up or whether it's going to go down or what's going to happen. And it's also great because investing in shares, unlike investing in real estate, well, real estate has done well. You saw the earlier chart which shows housing prices keep going up, 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 up. But a house is a big investment. Not everybody has a few million lying around to go and buy a bungalow and wait for its price to go up. In shares, you can start with just hundreds or thousands of dollars. You can start small. You can invest in different markets. If you think India is going to be the next big thing, you can change your Singapore dollars to Indian rupees and buy shares of a company on the Indian stock exchange. And related to what I said about investing in smaller amounts, the market for shares in companies is highly liquid. What this means is that if I need the money today and I need to sell my shares to raise the money today, I sell it right now. I can get a price for it. I'm not going to lower the price of shares too much. And I get my money, depending on which country you're trading shares in just a few days. If you were to sell a house to raise the money, you would probably have to drop the price by 5 or 10% to find a buyer straight away. And even if you're lucky enough to find someone to buy your property straight away today, you're not going to see that money, any money in your bank account for a few weeks at least. So those are what we call highly illiquid investments. So that's the reason why I prefer to invest in the stock market. Like I said, there are many, many things you can invest in. That's just my own preference. I said, I'm not here to tell you about how to make money on investments, what's the best investment to make. I just wanted to use my own experience to tell you why I think investments are very important. So just as a personal example, when I made an investment in the Singapore Stock Exchange when I was 26 years old. I was earning about 6,000 a month. And through my investment in the Singapore Stock Exchange and my meager salary, by the time I was 29, I was able to afford well, I don't recommend that everyone do this as well. I bought a convertible sports car with the earnings I made from my investments. So I'm a car crazy nut. I love cars. So that was one thing I really wanted. That was one of the goals I was working towards. And I figured I would be able to afford it maybe my late 30s if I just went on my salary. But with my investments, I could afford it in my late 20s. But like I said, not every story is a success story. There have been tears along the way as well. So if anyone has any questions, now's the time to fire them at me.